Hi guys. Tonight we wander into the cold marrow of medieval stone, a Crusader's castle, far from the sun-washed Holy Land, where winter presses hard against the battlements. Picture yourself there. The air is thin, crisp, and merciless, swirling with frost that creeps between the arrow slits like a living thing. The torches crackle, their light golden against grey walls that seem to exhale chill from centuries of wars and whispers. You pull your cloak tighter around you, the wool scratchy at your neck, wondering how anyone could sleep here without freezing. You probably won't survive this. Not without a mountain of blankets, a jug of mulled ale, and perhaps a small miracle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you are in the world and what time it is as you listen. Now, dim the lights, breathe slow, and let's step into the past together. The castle looms before you like the spine of an enormous beast, its towers jagged, its ramparts glistening with frost. Inside, the corridors breathe out the day's exhaustion. Men in mail stomp their boots clean of mud. The echo of armor fades as they descend to the lower halls, seeking firelight and whatever warmth can be coaxed from stone. The Crusaders have returned from campaign, perhaps not from the holy sands of Outremer, but from a border skirmish closer to home. They are weary, soot-streaked, and chilled to the bone. The year could be 1187 or 1220, it hardly matters. The cold feels eternal. In the great hall, you hear the low murmur of servants stacking wood in the central hearth. The flames leap and shrink in uneven rhythm, their shadows dancing across the banners of old victories. A smell of smoke and iron lingers, mingling with the faint tang of horse sweat that clings to their cloaks. One knight, his beard frosted white, unlatches his sword belt and sets it carefully beside him. "We'll sleep lighter tonight," he mutters, perhaps recalling the raid that took his friend last winter when raiders struck before dawn. Sleep in a castle was never deep. It was a truce, not surrender. You pace slowly over the flagstones, your footsteps hollow. Somewhere above, a door slams against a gust. The wind howls through a narrow passage like a sigh from the earth itself. The castle is alive with small, restless sounds, a rat skittering behind barrels, the groan of timber joists, a distant cough. Yet there is also peace here, the kind of peace born of exhaustion. The men are not thinking of tomorrow's march or prayer. They think only of warmth, of a place to lie down, of closing their eyes without shivering. Historians still argue whether Crusaders truly slept within the castle walls during winter campaigns or preferred the barracks and outbuildings for easier access to supplies. Some evidence suggests many knights chose to sleep near their horses in the stables, believing the animals' breath offered heat and a kind of companionship. Others insist that, after months in the field, a night under a roof, any roof, felt like luxury itself. Either way, the castle became a cocoon against the vast indifference of the medieval cold. You notice the torches guttering low now, replaced by small clay lamps set along the walls. The flame trembles each time someone passes, and you realize how vulnerable everything feels without steady light. There's no hum of electricity, no reassuring clock tick, only the pulse of fire and your own breath clouding in the air. You reach toward the hearth, palms open, letting the heat sting your skin. It smells of peat and sap and something faintly sweet, like burnt honey. A curious thing records mention that some castles piped warm air from lower kitchens through hollow walls, primitive heating that could turn icy chambers tolerable. You imagine that faint warmth sneaking up the stairwell, a secret luxury known only to the lord and his lady. Down in the soldiers' quarters, however, no such comfort existed. They relied on layers, wool, linen, and perhaps a fur stolen from a fox long since forgotten. You pass a narrow slit of a window where the moonlight spills like silver dust. Outside, the courtyard is frozen white, the well capped with ice. You can almost hear the wind's fingertips tapping against the shutters. And yet within the walls, something softer hums. The cadence of daily life surrendering to sleep. boots unlaced, a whispered joke, the quiet creak of a wooden chest closing on a secret. Every castle night was a small miracle of endurance. To sleep meant trust that the guards would stay awake, that the fire wouldn't die, that the enemy wouldn't come crawling through the dark. But it also meant yielding, letting the armor slip, allowing the body a few hours of forgetfulness. You feel that surrender now, in the slowing rhythm of breath and the fading ring of metal. A fringe chronicle from the early 13th century mentions a peculiar ritual. Before sleeping, knights would place a coin beneath their tongues, believing it would keep the soul from freezing should death visit in the night. It's an odd superstition, half prayer, half insurance policy. You picture them lying there, coin hidden, breath shallow, dreaming of warmth. Maybe it worked, or maybe the simple act of belief made the night a little easier to bear. The fire hisses as another log collapses inward. Sparks rise like fleeting stars. You feel their glow on your face and imagine each ember as a tiny story, a memory of battle, of distant Jerusalem, of love letters left behind. Above you, the beams creak. Beyond them, the sky deepens into velvet black. You could almost sleep now, lulled by the faint hum of the wind and the steady sighs of men finally resting. The fortress settles. It exhales. You listen. The night has only just begun, and already the weight of centuries feels softer. Tomorrow there will be drills, prayer, repairs to the wall perhaps, but tonight only the slow drift into warmth matters. You stretch out on the rough straw, pull the cloak higher, and let your mind slip further from the noise of daylight. And as you do, you realize that within these heavy stones lies not just defense but sanctuary, a reminder that even the hardest warriors needed softness, if only for a few hours each frozen night. The castle, cold and stern by day, becomes a cradle by night. You feel it now, the deep quiet, the faint heartbeat of fire, the fragile gift of warmth. Outside, the stars keep their silent watch. Inside, you drift, imagining the centuries folding gently around you. The first step into slumber has begun. You wake, or perhaps you never fully slept, only floated in that borderland where cold and dream intertwine. The air is sharper now, the fire a faint red eye in the distance. It's the kind of cold that hums beneath your skin rather than bites, and you feel it whisper through every seam in your blanket. The castle, though immense, is not your ally tonight. Its stones hoard chill like a miser hoards gold. You roll onto your side and listen, hearing the faint breath of the wind prowling through unseen cracks. A soft clatter makes you lift your head. Somewhere down the corridor, a shutter bangs open, slamming against its hinges. The sound echoes like distant thunder through the narrow passageways, drawing a muffled curse from a guard on patrol. You can almost see him wrapped in a heavy cloak, torch flickering, muttering about drafts that never end. And drafts are everywhere. The Crusader castle may be a fortress, but in truth, it's a sieve of icy air. The very features that make it defensible, its arrow slits, its parapets, its high ceilings, also make it an elaborate wind instrument, each aperture singing its own mournful tune. You step toward the nearest slit and feel the night pressing in, cold fingers stretching from the dark beyond the wall. Historians still argue whether medieval builders ever truly mastered insulation. Some claim they stuffed sheep's wool or moss into the gaps between stones, while others insist such measures were rare luxuries reserved for noble chambers. Either way, you can tell that for the men sleeping in the common rooms, the walls might as well be parchment for all the good they do against the wind. A knight nearby shifts beneath his cloak, grumbling in his sleep. His breath rises in small puffs, visible even in the dim light. The air smells of damp wool, oil, and the metallic tang of the iron sconces. The torches flicker as if fighting for their lives. You tuck your hands deeper beneath your cloak, and the fabric feels heavy and rough, the weave thick but uneven. Wool was the Crusaders' constant companion, prickly yet dependable, able to absorb moisture without feeling wet. And tonight, It's the only thing standing between you and the encroaching frost. The wind moans again, slipping through the battlements like a phantom. It finds its way into the hallways, twisting through stairwells, nipping ankles, teasing flames. The castle's corridors, once designed for the quick movement of guards, become channels for winter's breath. Some chroniclers even describe the cold draughts as the spirits of the slain, roaming the castle in penance. You smile at that thought, a poetic explanation for simple physics perhaps, but then again, who's to say? You pull your cloak closer and start moving, because stillness only invites the cold deeper. The floor beneath your boots is slick with condensation, glinting faintly where the light reaches. You pass through an archway into a narrower corridor, where the air feels trapped and older somehow, as if it's been waiting centuries just to touch your face. Here, the wind takes on a different voice, a faint whistle through cracks in the mortar. You pause and trace one with your fingertips. It's as thin as a hairline fracture, but you can feel the draft escaping like a sigh. A flicker of torchlight reveals frost blooming across the stone, a delicate lace that seems almost alive. You wonder how the masons ever built such walls in the first place, hauling stone in snow, working by daylight that barely warmed their hands. And then you remember something, a detail from a forgotten chronicle. Some castles, especially those in northern Europe, were said to have warming tapestries hung on interior walls. Not merely decoration, but insulation in disguise. Thick woven wool, embroidered with scenes of saints or battles, hung from ceiling to floor to keep out draughts. The richer the lord, the thicker the tapestry. You glance at the bare walls around you, and imagine how different this place would feel with crimson cloth and golden thread. Still, even nobles couldn't escape the chill entirely. A few accounts from Crusader letters tell of lords wearing fur-lined nightcaps and gloves to bed, their breath frosting on their mustaches as they dreamed. And the servants? They slept in corridors like this one, huddled against barrels or tucked behind doorways, using straw and cloaks for makeshift insulation. There's a humility in that image, people becoming part of the building itself, filling its cold pockets with their warmth. You stop near another narrow slit, this one half iced over, and look out. The courtyard is ghostly white. Snow piles against the walls, soft as ash. A torch burns on the far parapet, its flames sputtering sideways in the wind. You imagine the guard up there, stamping his feet, clutching a horn, cursing every gust that tears at his cloak. For him, there is no sleep at all, only endurance until dawn. You exhale slowly, watching your breath bloom and vanish in front of you. It's a strange comfort, proof that your warmth still exists, that you haven't become one of those silent spirits wandering the battlements. You turn back toward the hall, where the hearth's glow flickers faintly like a beacon. A quirky tidbit drifts through your memory. Some soldiers in the Levant supposedly stuffed bits of wool into their helmets to block drafts during night guard, only to discover that it muffled their hearing. The practice spread anyway, better deaf than frozen. You chuckle softly. Humans have always been practical in the strangest ways. The castle groans again. The wooden beams above creak, and a few flakes of frost fall from the ceiling. Somewhere below, a dog whines, restless in its sleep. The sounds are intimate, strangely tender for such a fortress. Each creak, each sigh of stone feels like the building itself breathing. You realize that in a world of wind and cold, sound becomes company. You settle near the hearth once more, drawn by instinct. The coals glow like a dying heart, but the faint warmth it gives off feels miraculous. You sit close enough to feel the air shimmer. Behind you, others stir and adjust, faces half lit, eyes half closed. And you can't help wondering, did they dream of warmth the way we dream of adventure? Did a Crusader, half frozen in his furs, imagine waking in a place where walls held heat instead of wind? Historians still debate how they endured the long winters, whether sheer will, shared body heat, or divine faith played the greater role. The castle shifts again, a slow, tired sigh of wood and stone. Outside, the wind's fury softens to a low hum. Inside, you feel something close to comfort, fragile, fleeting, but real. You close your eyes, letting the draft's cool fingers brush your cheek like a lullaby. The fortress, the cold, the night, they blur together now, one endless breath of history. You are part of it, just another soul curled up in the dark, listening for dawn. The fire murmurs low, its voice small and patient against the endless chill. You crouch closer, hands extended toward the glow, palms raw from the cold. The flicker of the hearth is more than light, it's survival, memory, ritual. You can almost hear the crackle of oak and the hiss of resin like conversation between centuries. In these castles, warmth was never a guarantee. It was a triumph renewed each evening by flame. It's well documented that medieval hearths were the heart of domestic life, literally and spiritually. The chimney, a relatively new invention at the time, changed everything. Before that, smoke drifted freely beneath the rafters, staining beams black and choking any hope of comfort. Now, even a small vent could coax the fumes upward, allowing fires to burn hotter and steadier. Imagine the relief after generations of watery eyes and coughing fits. You can feel that gratitude in the way every gaze in the hall is drawn to the hearth, like pilgrims before a shrine. You study the fire's architecture, log balanced upon log, its base lined with stones to reflect heat. It's not the bonfire of a festival, but a disciplined flame, meant to last through hours of silence. A servant kneels with practiced grace, stirring the embers, adding a twist of dried herbs. The air brightens with a scent that's sharp and earthy, rosemary, perhaps, or thyme from the kitchen garden. Such herbs didn't just sweeten the air, they were thought to cleanse it, to keep away sickness and spirits alike. A curious superstition claimed that tossing a pinch of salt into the fire could seal warmth inside the soul. You watch as one old soldier does just that, murmuring under his breath. Maybe it's habit, maybe hope, but you sense how fragile warmth felt in a place like this, where one gust could undo an hour's struggle. Some historians question whether these fires were truly sufficient to heat entire halls. The ceilings soared too high, the walls too thick, and the drafts too stubborn. Yet still, they burned through the night, through exhaustion, because a castle without fire was simply a tomb with a roof. The heat never spread evenly, of course. Those nearest the hearth basked, while those on the edges shivered under cloaks, pretending not to notice. Social hierarchy, even in sleep, was measured in degrees of warmth. You glance upward. Smoke trails through the rafters in lazy ribbons, caught in the crossbeams where spiders have spun trembling threads. It drifts toward a narrow vent, vanishing like breath into the dark. Around you, men begin to settle, some sitting close enough to feel their faces flush, others further back, where the glow barely touches their boots. The flames play over metal buckles, casting gleams like small suns. A faint murmur rises, a story told in half sentences, the kind of tale soldiers share when night's too long. Something about a siege, or a ghost, or a girl in Burgundy. Laughter ripples softly, quickly swallowed by the cavernous space. You lean back, letting the heat seep into your bones. The smell of singed wool fills your nostrils. One chronicler of the 12th century described winter evenings like this as the hour when men remember they are flesh. It's true. The armor, the piety, the discipline all fade in front of firelight. Here, in the half-dark, the Crusader is simply a creature of warmth and breath, grateful for each crackle that means the wood is still alive. The logs shift, collapsing in on themselves with a sigh. Sparks rise, bursting into tiny galaxies before fading. For a moment, the whole hall flickers like a dream, faces lit and shadowed, smoke swirling in halos. Someone nearby hums a low tune, a fragment of psalm perhaps, or a song from home. It blends with the hiss of the hearth, and suddenly you feel the room breathe as one. An odd custom mentioned in passing by a monastic traveller describes how, in some fortresses, the steward would walk the hall before midnight, whispering a blessing over each flame. Fire was both servant and spirit, they believed. If left unattended, it might wander off in the night, taking warmth with it. You find that oddly touching, the idea that even a blaze could be lonely. Experts have long disagreed about the role of central hearths in the daily rhythm of castle life. Some say they were purely functional. Others argue they were social anchors, the only place where hierarchy softened, where lord and soldier could share proximity without offense. Watching the circle of men around you, it's easy to believe the latter. The flame equalizes everything. You stretch your legs toward the warmth, boots steaming faintly. The firelight paints your skin gold, your breath silver. Beyond its circle, the hall is shadow, a void filled with snores, whispers, and the occasional clink of a cup. The contrast is absolute, warmth as civilization, cold as the wild, and every night, the line between them trembles. You imagine the fire as memory itself kept alive by constant tending. A knight's duty by day was to guard the gates. By night, it was to guard the ember. Lose either, and the world would collapse into darkness. Perhaps that's why, centuries later, archaeologists still find scorched hearthstones perfectly preserved, as if the warmth never left. The servant returns with more wood. He moves carefully, almost reverently, as if feeding a living thing. You hear the soft clunk of the log against stone, the bloom of new flame, the whisper of relief it brings. There's comfort in that repetition. Fire added, heat spreading, time continuing. You realize how much of survival is simply rhythm. Outside, wind scratches at the shutters, trying to claw its way in. The fire answers with a roar, proud and defiant. You smile faintly, watching the dance of shadow and gold. Every flame is a heartbeat, every spark a reminder that warmth can be made, even in a world built of ice and iron. Slowly, the hall dims again. The logs settle, the embers pulse like slow breathing. Around you, the Crusaders drift further towards sleep, trusting the fire to watch while they dream. You let your eyes close too, feeling the warmth reach you at last, tender and steady. The night no longer feels so endless. The hall grows quieter now, the laughter fading into the hush of exhausted breath. You sit in the amber twilight of the dying hearth, eyes half-lidded, watching as men and women, nobles, squires, servants alike, settle into their chosen corners. This is where the great divide of daylight dissolves. The lord who commands 100 riders shares air and shadows with the boy who tends his horse. Yet, even in this shared space, the hierarchy of warmth remains visible like invisible rings around the fire. Contemporary accounts suggest that during winter, the great hall was both dining chamber and dormitory. The tables, long and scarred, would be cleared of trenchers and cups after the evening meal. Straw was spread thick across the flagstones, sometimes mixed with fragrant herbs like mint or lavender, to mask the smells of people, dogs, and smoke. On this impromptu carpet, bodies arranged themselves by rank, nobles closest to the hearth, servants near the draughty doors, guards near the stairways, always alert even in slumber. You can almost see them, the tapestry of humanity laid out in a gradient from comfort to cold. One whimsical detail that survives from a 14th century household roll mentions that the straw for the lord's sleeping area was to be new and without dung of horse or beast, while lesser folk made do with whatever was left from the stables. The tone is matter of fact, not cruel. Everyone accepted their place in this nightly geography. Warmth, like power, trickled downward slowly, and by the time it reached the last servant, it was faint indeed. There's still no agreement among scholars as to whether women of the household shared the hall during these nights or withdrew entirely to private chambers. Some castles had adjoining solar rooms, small, upper-level spaces reserved for the lord's family, often equipped with their own hearth. Others did not. What seems certain is that privacy was a rare and fragile thing. In winter, even lords sometimes preferred company to solitude, for company meant heat. The air smells of tallow candles, roasted meat lingering from supper, and the musky sweetness of hay. You lie back on your bed of straw, feeling its coarse ends poke through the cloth beneath your shoulder blades. The sound it makes dry, whispery, alive, fills the silence like rain on a roof. Someone snores. Someone else mutters a prayer. Far off, a dog shifts, the jingle of its chain faint as a memory. It's strange to think that this hall, so massive by day, shrinks by night into a kind of communal nest. The echo softens. The walls draw closer. The tapestries, if there are any, quiver slightly in the draught, their woven saints and soldiers flickering in the last of the firelight. You wonder how it felt to sleep surrounded by painted eyes that never close. Archaeological findings confirm that even high-status sleepers relied heavily on layers rather than softness. Mattresses stuffed with straw or feathers were luxuries transported from warmer lands, too costly to be common. Most beds, even those carved for nobility, held only sacks of chaff covered by linen sheets. The real comfort came from quantity: cloaks, furs, and bodies. The closer people lay, the warmer they became. For all their distance in class, they shared that simple, animal truth. You roll slightly, letting the straw rustle. A spark from the hearth drifts upward and vanishes. In that moment, the hall feels like a living organism. Breath, warmth, heartbeat. You imagine the whispers curling into the rafters, where smoke and dreams intertwine. A peculiar local saying went that a castle's true king is its hearth. You can see why. Every night, this same ritual unfolds, fire lit, bellies full, cloaks drawn tight, songs fading to silence. Each sleeper surrenders to the same rhythm, each trusting the others not to steal, not to stab, not to let the fire die. It's an agreement older than any charter. Survive the night together, and daylight will sort the rest. No consensus exists on why chroniclers so rarely described these domestic scenes in detail. Perhaps they deemed them unworthy of record, too ordinary, too human. Yet these are the moments that built endurance more surely than battles did. The body that can rest through cold can rise again to fight, or pray, or build. The straw beneath you becomes a kind of foundation, humble yet indispensable. The air grows colder still. Someone stirs, adds a log to the fire. The new flame flares, washing the room in amber once more. For an instant, the faces around you glow like ancient icons, sleeping, dreaming, mouths half open. You think of how time folds here. Centuries of sleepers, one atop the other, all reaching for warmth in the same way. You pull your cloak tighter and trace the edge of your glove with your thumb. The wool is rough but steady. In the darkness beyond the hearth's reach, the stone walls breathe their frozen breath. The cold is patient. It waits. But for now, the people are warmer than it is. Some experts argue that the communal sleeping arrangement was as much about morale as about heat. Alone, the wind could unmake you. Together, you might just outlast it. You find that idea oddly comforting, the way humans, even armored and devout, reverted to something primal when the world turned bitter. A fragment of song drifts from a half-asleep mouth, a lullaby from a village long gone. The notes hover, fragile as the glow from the hearth, and then dissolve into quiet. You listen to the rhythm of breathing, the shifting of straw, the deep sigh of a world at rest. And in that fragile hush, you realize that the great hall is not only a fortress, but also a cradle, its stones cradling the weary, its fire beating like a heart. Sleep comes not as conquest, but as surrender, gentle and necessary. The flames dip once more. Shadows reclaim the walls. Around you, the Crusaders sleep, men of iron, dreaming in straw. You close your eyes, and the cold recedes just a little. The night holds. The fire has burned low again, just embers now, a faint pulse of red in a sea of darkness. You draw your cloak higher, but still the cold finds seams, slipping through like a sly creature. You can feel the castle breathing slow, uneven, the inhalation of ancient stone. The night deepens around you, and suddenly you notice how every small sound has become sharp. A cough, the settling of wood, the sigh of someone turning in sleep. Surviving manuscripts note that warmth in these walls depended on materials as much as on fire. Layering was the secret: wool over linen, fur over wool, feather over straw. A knight could face a blizzard in armor, but without proper bedding he'd freeze before dawn. The hierarchy of comfort wasn't just about rank, it was about who could afford fox pelts or goose down. Common soldiers relied on coarse wool blankets that scratched the skin raw, while the noble few tucked themselves beneath fur trimmed from squirrel, marten, even ermine if they were lucky or vain. You run your gloved hand across your own cloak, feeling its weight. Wool holds heat well, but dampness is its enemy. The smell of wet fabric lingers in the hall like breath that never leaves. A handful of men are curled near the fire, their cloaks stiff with frost where they brushed the snow earlier. Each time one shifts, you can hear the faint crackle of frozen fibers. An odd custom mentioned in letters from the Levant tells of Crusaders stuffing straw inside their cloaks before sleep to trap warmth, a trick learned from local shepherds. It worked, but the price was fleas. You smile faintly, imagining a knight itching beneath his armor, swatting at invisible foes long after the real battle was done. Comfort, it seems, always demanded some indignity. Researchers remain divided on how effective these medieval sleep arrangements really were. Some argue that, given the lack of insulation, the human body's resilience was remarkable, that the constant exposure bred toughness we can barely imagine today. Others claim that chronic cold led to endless ailments, joint pain, frostbite, and the slow erosion of spirit. Perhaps both are true. Endurance and suffering were so often twins in this age. You shift closer to the dying embers. The stones still radiate a ghost of warmth, and you rest your palm against them, tracing the uneven texture. The soot stains your fingertips. It feels oddly intimate, as if you're touching time itself. The floor beneath you is strewn with straw and wool scraps, bits of last night's bedding mixed with ash from the hearth. The texture under your hand is soft and rough all at once, like history refusing to smooth itself out. A faint draft licks your ear. You glance upward. The tapestries near the dais tremble, their patterns dull in the darkness. The woven beasts, griffins, lions, hunting hounds seem to move, stretching under the flickering light. Once, these heavy drapes were as valuable as armor. They trapped heat and told stories. Every stitch was both protection and proclamation. Here dwells power. You pull your blanket tighter, and the fabric creaks. Beneath it, another layer linen, worn thin. Beneath that, a rough tunic, patched at the elbows. The layering feels like a slow surrender, each garment a small fortress. You begin to understand how sleep itself was a kind of art, the right balance between weight and breath, between being cocooned and suffocated. One eccentric knight reportedly believed that fur stolen from a bear held the animal's strength through the night. He slept wrapped in it before every campaign, convinced that the warmth carried courage. Perhaps it did. The mind makes powerful armor when the world turns bitter. The night outside howls again. Wind combs through the cracks, rattling shutters, teasing smoke from the hearth. You picture the storm rolling over the hills, sweeping across forests, battering the outer walls. Inside, you and the others are small flames in a vast dark ocean, each breath a rebellion against frost. No consensus exists on whether Crusaders brought Eastern sleep customs back to Europe. Some say the feather mattress, a luxury of the wealthy, spread through contact with Byzantine merchants. Others claim it remained a novelty, dismissed by hard-born knights as unmanly softness. You wonder how they would view our own comforts, heated rooms, blankets woven by machines, the very idea of choosing a temperature. Maybe they'd laugh. Maybe they'd envy us quietly. The hall groans again, timbers settling. Someone mutters in Latin, a snatch of prayer to Saint Wenceslas, patron of winter travellers. The sound drifts through the air like incense. For a moment, the cold eases. You close your eyes and imagine the layers not as fabric but as memory. Wool spun by peasants who never saw a crusade, fur trapped by hands hardened from frost, feathers plucked from geese that once flew across grey skies. Every scrap carries the story of another life, another warmth borrowed. You wrap yourself in that lineage and feel the centuries breathe against your skin. A traveller's journal from the 13th century describes the scent of a sleeping hall as a garden of smoke, wool, and bodies. You smile softly at the phrase, it's both unkind and tender, perfectly true. In that smell, you find humanity, raw and enduring. You shift again, listening to the steady chorus of sleepers. The fire hums faintly, and the air tastes of ash. Your body begins to sink, heavy with the slow relief of warmth gathering at last. The layers hold, and as you drift towards sleep, you realize that comfort in these walls was never about luxury, it was about persistence. To build warmth was to build hope, stitch by stitch, fur by fur, breath by breath. Outside, the wind moves on, searching for cracks elsewhere. Inside, the silence deepens. The firs whisper against your ear as you turn. Somewhere far above, an owl calls once, then vanishes into snow. The castle sleeps again. The night lingers, and the fire has dwindled to a slow, steady glow. Around you, the sleeping bodies breathe in uneven rhythm. A helmet gleams faintly in the shadows, its curve catching the light of the last ember. You notice how the steel seems alive, as if it too is keeping watch. It reminds you that no one here ever truly sleeps without an audience of weapons. Records from the period show that Crusaders often kept their swords or daggers within arm's reach, even when they rested indoors. A man could take off his armor, but never his caution. In an age when raids, betrayals, and sudden alarms were common, sleep had to share its bed with fear. Many slept in linen shirts or padded gambesons, ready to rise at the call of a horn. To the medieval mind, peace was never a guarantee, only an interval. You reach toward the nearby stand where a suit of chainmail hangs, the links catching faint light like frozen rain. The metal is cold beneath your fingertips. It smells of oil and rust, the scent of battle resting quietly beside slumber. You imagine the weight of it on a man's shoulders, the way it might feel to shed that burden only for a few hours before dawn. A curious superstition circulated among soldiers that keeping your sword beside your bed warded off nightmares. The weapon, they believed, was an extension of the soul, a guardian even while its master slept. You picture a knight curled up beside his blade, as though it were a pet or a lover. The gesture is almost tender, and perhaps in its own way, sacred. Some researchers question whether Crusaders ever truly let themselves rest. Chronic exhaustion was common, especially during long sieges. Many letters describe half-sleep, a drifting state in which the body collapsed but the ears stayed alert for danger. In those moments, the line between waking and dreaming blurred, filled with sounds that might be real or imagined. The clang of a distant gate, the echo of a trumpet, the wind mistaken for footsteps. You shift on your straw bed and listen. The castle has its own vocabulary of noises. The wind hums through arrow slits like a whisper. Beams stretch and sigh. Somewhere deep below, a guard's boots scrape the flagstones. The air is so still that the faint clink of armor sounds almost deliberate, as if the metal remembers movement even in rest. The hall smells of wax and steel, of cold stone and lingering smoke. You can taste the air, metallic and faintly bitter. Every breath reminds you of the labor it took to build this fortress. The forging of nails, the quarrying of rock, the hammering of wood. Each sound is both human and mechanical, the echo of endurance. One peculiar detail recorded by a traveling monk tells of knights who slept with their gauntlets still on, claiming that removing them invited idle thoughts. Whether that meant temptation or terror, the record does not say. You can almost laugh, imagining these grim warriors too tired to dream, yet afraid to unclench their fists. Experts have long disagreed about how much personal space existed in these communal quarters. Some argue that men slept shoulder to shoulder, armor piled at their feet, to conserve heat and foster solidarity. Others believed that each knight claimed a small perimeter of straw around him, guarded by habit and sharp elbows. Either way, privacy was a foreign concept. The sound of your neighbour's breath was part of the landscape, like the wind or the fire. You let your eyes wander upward to the ceiling beams, blackened by years of smoke. They seemed to lean inward, forming a rib cage above the sleepers. Beneath it, rows of steel helmets rest like silent heads. You realize that the hall has transformed into an armory of dreams. Men and weapons coexist in uneasy harmony, each depending on the other to survive the next dawn. It is easy to forget that even the most devout Crusader carried fear in his bones. Beneath the prayers and banners lay a deep, human anxiety, that the world beyond the wall might intrude at any moment. Sleep, in such a place, was a rehearsal for death. To close one's eyes was to trust the guard on the tower, the strength of the gate, the mercy of God. You can almost feel that tension in the air, stretched tight like a bowstring. A faint clatter startles you. A sword slips from its stand, landing softly against the straw. No one stirs. You bend forward and lift it carefully. The blade is heavy, its edge dull from use, its pommel engraved with a worn cross. You place it back against the wall and watch as its reflection wavers in the low light. The gesture feels reverent, as though you have just returned a relic to its shrine. Some modern scholars suggest that this constant intimacy with weapons shaped the medieval idea of self. A knight was never unarmed in spirit. Even when he slept, his sense of identity lay beside him in steel. The sword was both his defense and his definition. You think about that as you watch the room breathe. The embers glow faintly, pulsing like the beat of a distant heart. Around them, bodies lie still. The air feels thicker now, warmed slightly by all that shared breath. You close your eyes and listen to the mingled music of sleep, the low rumble of snoring, the faint ring of chain links shifting, the occasional cough swallowed by darkness. You wonder if any of them dream. Do they see battlefields or home? Do they dream of warmth, of faces they'll never see again? The hall gives no answer, only the steady rhythm of night itself. Your head grows heavy. The sword's glimmer fades, the cold softens, and for the first time you feel the quiet as something kind rather than cruel. The steel keeps its vigil, and you, at last, drift into the same uneasy peace the Crusaders once knew. The air carries a new sound now, faint and rhythmic, like ripples in water. You lift your head slightly and listen. It is the low murmur of prayer, soft enough to blend with the crackle of coals. Somewhere nearby, in a small chapel carved into the inner wall, a priest chants the midnight office. The Latin syllables rise and fall like waves against stone, comforting in their repetition. Castle records reveal that nightly prayers were as essential as the meal or the fire. For Crusaders, faith was both armor and anesthetic. No one could face endless winters, uncertain battles, or the memory of blood without something larger to lean on. Each night, before rest, they spoke to the divine as if to a companion who shared the cold. The chapel, lit by a few candles, was the only place where warmth came from words. You picture the small space now. The walls are damp, the floor uneven, and yet it feels alive with devotion. Wax drips down iron holders, pooling like honey. The smell of smoke mingles with incense, thick and sweet, clinging to your throat. Each breath tastes faintly of frankincense and thyme. A curious practice mentioned by a chronicler from Burgundy describes how soldiers, too weary to stand, would kneel only halfway and rest their heads on their shields while praying. It was a compromise between piety and exhaustion, half holy, half human. You smile softly at the image, warriors leaning on their own defenses, whispering thanks that they are still alive to be tired. Some experts question whether the nightly prayers were acts of true faith or gestures of discipline meant to maintain order. In the tension of medieval life, belief and obedience were intertwined. Perhaps sincerity did not matter as much as the ritual itself, the comfort of shared rhythm, When 100 voices whispered the same words into the dark, it created something like heat, something that made the night a little easier to bear. You step closer to the chapel door, drawn by the hum of voices. The entrance is narrow, framed by rough stone smoothed by countless hands. Inside, the light flickers against the curved walls, revealing a painted icon of the Virgin and Child, faces serene but worn with smoke. The paint glows faintly gold, like memory trapped in pigment. One pilgrim's diary from the early 13th century tells of knights who slept with small relics beneath their pillows. Splinters of wood said to come from the true cross, or fragments of cloth touched to the bones of saints. The idea was that holiness could radiate through the body like warmth. Whether or not it worked, you cannot tell, but the belief itself has its own quiet beauty. You sit on a low bench near the entrance. The sound of prayer fills the space like slow rain. The Latin phrases melt into each other, syllables sliding across the air. You do not need to understand the words to feel their rhythm. It is the cadence of endurance, of men clinging to meaning when comfort is scarce. No agreement exists among historians about how strictly these nightly devotions were observed. Some argue that the rituals were shortened in wartime or in severe weather, while others claim they were never abandoned. The surviving evidence is uneven, fragmentary, like the light of this chapel. But listening now, you feel certain that something about this ritual was essential. It stitched the hours together, kept chaos at bay. The priest's voice falters for a moment, then rises again, softer this time. His Latin is worn at the edges, half swallowed by fatigue. Behind him, a young acolyte swings a censer, the chain rattling gently. The smoke curls upward, silver against the blackness. The air is thick but alive, like a lung breathing in faith. You glance toward the back of the chapel, where a single candle burns apart from the others. Its flame trembles, casting long shadows across the stone altar. You can hear faint whispers behind you, the kind that hover between prayer and confession. These are not men boasting of courage or conquest. They are asking forgiveness, or simply speaking to fill the silence inside themselves. An odd tradition mentioned in a forgotten sermon describes how some Crusaders, before sleeping, traced a cross not on their chest but on their sword blade. It was a small act of unity between flesh and steel, as if reminding themselves that both belonged to the same purpose. You imagine the gesture, slow and deliberate, the steel catching the light for just a heartbeat before dimming again. The chanting fades at last. The priest extinguishes the last candle, leaving only the faint glow of the hearth outside. You stand, feeling the cold rush back into the room like a tide. The prayers have ended, but their echo lingers, woven into the stone. It hums under your feet, a vibration rather than a sound. You step back into the hall. The air is cooler, the fire a dim circle of red, yet something has changed. The space feels calmer, softer. The prayers have left a kind of invisible warmth, a stillness that wraps around the sleepers like another blanket. You walk past them slowly, careful not to disturb. A few have crossed themselves even in sleep, their fingers resting lightly on their chests. Their faces, in the dim light, look almost peaceful. The battle between body and faith has paused for a while. You lie back down and close your eyes. The smell of incense clings faintly to your hair. You feel the rhythm of the prayers still vibrating in your chest. In this moment, the castle does not feel like a fortress or a cage. It feels like a sanctuary suspended in frost, where silence itself becomes a form of prayer. The night has ripened into its quietest hour, the one where breath feels louder than thought. You shift slightly, and the straw rustles beneath you like dry grass under a summer wind. Around you, the last murmurs of prayer fade, leaving only the whisper of embers and the pulse of sleeping bodies. In the dark, scent becomes its own language. Contemporary accounts describe the fragrance of castle nights as a mixture of smoke, tallow, wool, and humanity. The air is thick with the residue of the day, sweat, oil, old wine, and the faint sweetness of herbs tossed on the floor to freshen the air. You breathe it in and realize how scent can hold memory, how the castle itself smells of endurance. You can pick apart the layers if you try. There is the faint animal musk of fur cloaks drying by the fire, the sour tang of ale left unfinished in wooden cups, and the heavy comfort of burning wood. Somewhere beneath it all is a softness, the faint spice of cloves and nutmeg from the kitchens below. Every smell tells a story, even the unpleasant ones. They are proof of life, of warmth fighting against decay. A curious report from a physician serving in a Crusader garrison claimed that keeping rosemary near one's bed improved sleep and banished evil dreams. He prescribed bunches of the herb tied with red thread and placed beneath pillows. Whether through faith or fragrance, the soldiers swore it worked. You smile, imagining rough hands tying those small charms, hoping that scent could protect the mind. Some modern experts suggest that castles developed their own microclimates of aroma. The mix of smoke and human scent became so pervasive that inhabitants no longer noticed it. To outsiders, it might have seemed unbearable, but to those who lived within, it was home. Like the hum of bees in a hive, it was both background and comfort. You tilt your head toward the nearest torch and watch it quiver. The tallow candle beside it releases a faint hiss, its wax pooling like amber sap. The smell is thick, oily, and slightly sweet. You imagine how expensive beeswax must have been in these times, reserved for chapels and noble chambers, while tallow filled every common space with its smoky perfume. The difference between rich and poor could be measured by what burned above their heads. An odd superstition survives in the writings of a minor knight who believed that burning a strand of horsehair in the fire before sleep kept ghosts from entering the room. The smell, he wrote, was foul but holy. You almost laugh at the thought, then realize that in the blackness of a medieval night, superstition was as natural as breathing. The unknown had weight, and scent was a kind of invisible shield. There is no scholarly agreement on whether incense was commonly used outside the chapel, but fragments of resin found in excavations suggest that some households kept small censers burning through the night. The smoke may have been for health, or simply for comfort. Perhaps the smell of spice and wood was enough to remind sleepers of warmth, of faraway lands where cold was not an enemy. You shift again, pulling the cloak higher over your shoulders. The fabric smells faintly of lanolin, earthy and raw. The scent clings to your skin, reminding you of sheep on a distant hillside, their wool transformed into this fragile barrier between flesh and frost. You think about how every odor, every lingering trace in the air, connects back to something living. Even in this fortress of stone, life leaves its invisible fingerprints. The fire pops, startling a nearby sleeper. He groans, turns over, and mutters something half-coherent. The smell of wood smoke drifts toward you, deep and familiar. It smells of safety, though you know it hides danger. Too much smoke, and the air would choke. Too little, and the cold would creep in. Balance. Always balance. A forgotten chronicle of domestic life in the north mentions that servants sometimes scented straw with mint, thyme, or juniper when the lord was in residence. The herbs were believed to drive away fleas and bring cheer to the mind. You can imagine the faint green scent rising as the straw was spread across the floor, a small kindness in a world of iron and frost. Researchers continue to debate whether the medieval sense of smell was more acute than ours. Without the distractions of modern perfumes or chemicals, perhaps every fragrance was sharper, every odor more alive. You believe it must have been. In this dark, even the smallest wisp of smoke or spice seems to carry meaning. You inhale again, slower this time. The scents of the night fold together into something almost musical. Smoke as bass, wool as harmony, spice as high note. It fills you, warms you, settles you. You realize that these smells are not unpleasant anymore. They are the breath of history itself, the perfume of survival. Outside, the wind still prowls around the towers, but its voice feels distant now, muffled by the warm air inside. The fragrance of burning wood anchors you to the present moment. The night, cold and vast, feels almost tender. You sink back, let your eyes close, and let the smells of the past lull you toward rest. The fire's glow has softened into a quiet haze. You stir from half-sleep, sensing movement nearby. A faint scuff of boots, the creak of a bucket handle, the whisper of fabric brushing stone. Servants move through the hall, shadows among shadows, tending to the needs of the sleeping fortress. They are the keepers of warmth, the unseen pulse that keeps the night alive. It is well recorded in manorial household accounts that castle servants rarely slept through the night in winter. Their duties continued long after their lords closed their eyes. Someone had to feed the fire, fetch fresh logs from the yard, and make sure that no ember faded to ash before dawn. A single cold hearth could turn the night deadly for everyone. You watch them quietly. One servant crouches near the embers, blowing gently until a faint flame stirs again. His breath creates a cloud of vapor in the frigid air. The faint sound of crackling wood follows, small and hopeful. Another servant carries a tray with pitchers of ale and cloth-wrapped leftovers from supper, meant for guards who will not see their beds until daylight. A curious letter written by a visiting abbot describes how servants were said to gossip during these late rounds, whispering secrets in the language of half-sleep. The writer seemed both scandalized and amused, calling it the kingdom of whispers that rules between midnight and dawn. You can almost hear them now, their voices weaving through the shadows. Low laughter, fragments of rumor, the names of knights spoken with affection or irritation. Archaeological evidence confirms that servants often slept in transitional spaces, such as passageways or by stairwells. Their bedding was nothing more than old cloaks or piles of rushes, laid down where warmth was likely to pass. They learned to sleep lightly, waking at the faintest sound of a log splitting or a cup shattering. To live in service was to exist between waking and rest, between warmth and duty. You follow one servant with your eyes as he walks toward the far end of the hall. His candle trembles with each step, leaving a wavering trail of light along the walls. He stops near the great door, where cold air seeps through the seams, and pushes a folded cloth into the gap to keep the draught out. The gesture is small, but it feels monumental, a private battle against the winter itself. There is a strange comfort in their quiet competence. These are not warriors or nobles, yet their labor is as vital as any sword. Without them, the castle would freeze from the inside out. You can almost sense how their movements create invisible circles of safety. A log added here, a blanket adjusted there, warmth passed from one room to another like a shared secret. One peculiar detail recorded in a household manual from the 13th century notes that servants sometimes wore small pouches of ash around their necks to absorb sweat and ward away chill. It sounds absurd, but perhaps the ash, warm from the fire, offered brief comfort. Or perhaps it was symbolic, a reminder that warmth and dust were the same in the end. Experts continue to debate the social position of domestic workers in Crusader castles. Were they merely tools of their masters, or quiet custodians of power in their own right? The records rarely speak their names, yet their touch lingers everywhere, in the smooth handles of wooden ladles, in the clean hearths, in the neat arrangement of blankets. Their presence is felt even when forgotten. The servant by the fire glances up for a moment. His face glows in the emberlight, eyes rimmed with fatigue but steady. You realize how young he is, hardly older than a squire. His fingers move with practiced care as he places another log on the flame. You hear it crackle, smell the wood smoke unfurl again, and feel the air around you grow less brittle. He stands, stretches, and walks toward a nearby alcove where a handful of others huddle together. They share the warmth of their own breath, talking softly. You catch only fragments of their world: a missing comb, a cat stealing scraps from the kitchen, a joke about the Lord's snoring. These are small stories, but they hold the weight of survival. You think about how many centuries of servants have walked these same paths, their footsteps worn into the stone like an unrecorded prayer. They are the invisible chorus behind every noble history. The warmth in this hall, is theirs as much as anyone's. Some historians propose that this nightly rhythm of servant movement created a sense of reassurance for those asleep. The faint sounds of work, the shovel of ashes, the clatter of tongs became lullabies of safety. Silence would have been more terrifying, because silence meant the fire had died, and with it, hope. The servants finish their rounds at last. The youngest sits near the hearth, rubbing his hands and staring into the coals. You watch the light dance across his face, reflecting in his tired eyes. He is not thinking of glory or of saints. He is thinking of warmth, of rest, of dawn. Gradually his eyelids droop. The hall quiets again, wrapped once more in shared stillness. The air smells faintly of smoke and bread, the last trace of their effort. You close your eyes, feeling gratitude for their unseen care. The fire hums softly, steady and alive. Somewhere beyond the walls, snow begins to fall again, muffling the world. Inside, the servants sleep at last, their work done until the next whisper of dawn. The castle breathes in rhythm with them, warm for a little while longer. The snow has thickened outside, and the castle feels sealed within its own breath. You stir as a faint draught brushes your face, then pull the cloak tighter. The fire still burns, but the cold has learned how to slip through every crevice, clever and relentless. A single shiver ripples through the hall like a chain reaction. Someone groans, another coughs, a third pulls the covers closer with sleepy defiance. Chroniclers of the 13th century often wrote of bone-deep winters, seasons when even the strongest felt their joints stiffen and their teeth ache with chill. The human body was a fragile fortress against such cold, and each castle had its own collection of remedies, comforts, and peculiar beliefs. Tonight, you can almost sense them all lingering in the air like invisible potions. It was common knowledge that heat stones could be wrapped in cloth and slipped beneath bedding. These river-smoothed rocks, warmed by fire, held their glow for hours. Records from English and French keeps describe them as sleep stones, valued more than silver during harsh winters. You reach toward the hearth and imagine the servants preparing them, turning each one in the flames until it glowed, then swaddling it carefully before passing it to shivering hands. An odd practice mentioned by a traveling physician claimed that slicing an onion and placing it in your socks before sleep would draw out the frost. No one knew why it worked, if it worked at all, but many swore by it. The logic of comfort often mattered less than the feeling of control, the illusion that one could fight back against the weather. You smile at the thought of stoic warriors padding their boots with onions, desperate for warmth. Some researchers suggest that belief itself was as important as any fire. In an age of mystery and prayer, faith and imagination were part of medicine. To wrap a hot stone in wool, to whisper to a saint, or to swallow a sip of mulled ale before bed, was to weave small defences into the fabric of night. Even the most improbable remedies carried the promise of sleep. You shift closer to the hearth. The heat reaches your face first, soft and damp. Someone has hung a pot of water above the coals, and its slow simmer fills the air with a comforting hiss. The scent of herbs rises from it, thyme, sage, perhaps a little honey. It smells medicinal but gentle. A servant must have prepared it for the sick or the sleepless, a simple remedy passed from memory to memory. A peculiar anecdote preserved in a castle ledger tells of a cook who swore that warm wine mixed with crushed garlic cured numb fingers. The lord found it disgusting but tolerated the smell, claiming it gave him strength to endure the morning chill. Perhaps that cook was right. Perhaps courage really did begin with flavor. Experts continue to dispute whether medieval people understood body heat in medical terms or mystical ones. Some evidence points to the humoral theory, where warmth balanced the cold humors of winter. Other sources describe heat as divine essence, a spark lent by God that could fade if neglected. Both ideas share the same truth. Warmth was precious, finite, and sacred. You notice a faint glow from the far side of the room. A woman in a plain wool dress moves quietly among the sleepers, checking their coverings, adjusting cloaks, tucking stray corners of fabric. Her face is lined by candlelight, her movements slow and steady. She hums something soft, a tune without words. It might be a lullaby, or a prayer disguised as one. You watch her pause beside a knight whose armor rests beside him. She bends, touches his brow as if checking for fever, then places a warmed cloth at his feet. The gesture is simple, but in it there is something ancient, a devotion that has nothing to do with rank. In a world ruled by swords and banners, care still finds a way to slip quietly between the stones. A curious regional custom from northern France tells of sleep charms written on parchment and tucked under pillows. They were inscribed with verses from the Psalms or small sketches of the sun, meant to protect against chill and nightmare alike. Many were found centuries later, faded to near invisibility, their ink smudged by sweat and breath. You wonder how many nights those little scraps of faith endured before turning to dust. The fire sighs, releasing a puff of smoke that curls toward the ceiling beams. You trace the movement with your eyes, watching it vanish through cracks into the cold above. Around you, the hall has grown quieter again. The groans and coughs have softened. Perhaps the onion and the warm stones have worked after all. There is no consensus among historians about how much the cold shaped the rhythms of castle life. But some believe winter bred a deeper sense of humility. It stripped away pride, made kings and servants equal before the frost. Tonight, you feel that equality in the stillness. No one here is above the need for warmth, not even the most devout knight or the proudest lady. You settle back, adjusting the layers around you. The straw beneath your body rustles softly, holding faint warmth from your own skin. The air carries the mixed scent of herbs, wood smoke, and sweat. It is not pleasant, yet it feels alive. Every breath draws you deeper into the fragile comfort of the hall. Outside, snow presses against the shutters, muting the world beyond. Inside, the air glows faintly orange. You close your eyes, feeling the warmth linger in your fingers. The remedies may be strange, the beliefs naive, but they work, at least for now. The castle sleeps again, wrapped not only in furs and fire, but in faith, habit, and the small inventive courage of those who refuse to surrender to the cold. You wake to a sound that is neither wind nor fire, but the deep, steady rhythm of boots pacing above you. The watchmen are changing shifts on the ramparts. Their footsteps echo faintly through the stone, each one a reminder that even as others sleep, someone must keep the cold at bay with vigilance. You sit up slowly and listen to their muffled movements, the soft rattle of armor, the faint jingle of chain as they trade greetings in low voices. Records from the time show that night watches were divided into segments called vigils, lasting roughly 3 hours each. It was the simplest way to ensure that no wall was left unguarded. In winter, these vigils were both punishment and pride. A good watchman was measured not by bravery in battle, but by his endurance against frost. You pull your cloak tighter, imagining the view from the tower. The wind would slice through every seam of clothing, turning breath into smoke. A man might stamp his feet to keep feeling in his toes, muttering curses at the moon while trying to stay awake. The snow would glitter on the battlements, pure and silent, masking danger beneath beauty. A curious note from a French garrison ledger tells how guards kept flasks of warm ale spiced with ginger to stay alert, some mixed in honey or cloves when supplies allowed. One veteran even claimed that rubbing a little garlic on the soles of his feet kept the frost from creeping upward. It sounds foolish, but when you picture the cold's sharp teeth, you understand the desperation behind the ritual. Scholars remain divided on whether the guards of these castles truly trusted their walls. Some argue that the design of towers and battlements gave a false sense of security. Others insist that stone, once frozen solid, became stronger than iron. Standing watch at night must have felt like floating between certainty and doubt, each gust of wind a question without answer. You rise quietly and walk toward a narrow slit of a window. The air near it is raw and sharp. You peer through, and the night greets you with glittering silence. The courtyard below is buried under snow, smooth and untouched. Beyond the outer walls, The forest bends under the weight of frost, dark shapes swaying like sleeping giants. Above it all, the sky burns with stars, cold and endless. A peculiar observation recorded by a pilgrim passing through the Levant describes how guards sometimes sang softly to themselves to stay awake. The tunes were old village songs, fragments of home. Their voices, carried on the wind, were said to sound like ghostly choirs to those inside. Perhaps it was loneliness turned into melody. You can almost hear it now, faintly, like a lullaby for the stones. You imagine the watchman on the western tower, hunched in his fur-lined cloak, hands gripping a spear more for comfort than defense. His breath clouds before his face. His eyes scan the horizon, where the sky and snow blur together. Every sound could be a threat, or simply the whisper of ice shifting. He listens anyway, because that is his duty to hear what others cannot. Some experts believe that these lonely sentinels developed a strange intimacy with the night. Their letters and confessions often describe the sky as both companion and adversary. "The stars mock us," one wrote, "for they never sleep." Others found peace in the stillness, saying that God's silence felt closer when the world was frozen. Whatever they felt, they carried it quietly, like an ember in the chest. You rest your forehead against the cold stone and feel the texture of it. Rough, damp, unyielding. The castle itself seems to hum beneath your fingers, vibrating with the low resonance of the wind. For the watchmen above, this sound is both comfort and test. It reminds them they are not alone, yet it also warns them that the cold is always listening. A curious superstition persisted among northern sentinels. If frost formed on the tip of your spear before dawn, it meant peace would hold for another day. Some even checked their weapons at sunrise like priests reading omens. It was not science, but faith disguised as observation. In a world where so much was uncertain, any sign was worth believing. No full agreement exists among historians about how these guards were chosen. Some say the task rotated among soldiers, others that a few hardy men volunteered, proud of their endurance. Perhaps it varied from castle to castle. What is certain is that every watch was a battle of patience rather than strength, a duel with the cold itself. You step away from the window and glance back toward the hall. The fire still glows faintly, though the warmth feels distant now. You picture the watchmen pacing above, tracing invisible circles through the night, their footsteps the heartbeat of the fortress. Each step keeps the world from freezing entirely. The wind changes tone, shifting from a howl to a soft hum. Snow drifts past the window slit like ash from another world. Somewhere above, a horn sounds once, low and short, marking the end of a vigil. Relief spreads through the hall below. The unseen guards descend the stairs, boots thudding lightly. They pass by the sleeping bodies without a word, their faces pale, their breath trembling. One sits by the fire, thawing his hands. His fingers are red and raw, his eyes heavy. You watch as a servant hands him a cup of ale. He drinks without speaking, staring into the coals as if they hold secrets. In the orange light, his exhaustion looks holy, carved into him by duty. You feel a quiet respect for these men, the ones who never fully rest. They are the thin thread between safety and ruin. Their courage is not shouted, not sung, it is simply endured, hour after hour, night after night. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Inside, warmth flickers once more. The watchmen rise again, ready to climb back into the cold. And as they vanish into the dark, the castle exhales, content that it has survived another hour of winter's siege. The night stretches on, but now it feels quieter, calmer, as if the castle itself has begun to dream. You let your head sink back onto the straw, your body heavy with borrowed warmth. The hall smells of smoke, old wool, and cooling embers. Somewhere above, the last watchman's footsteps fade into stillness. You close your eyes and drift toward the fragile edge of sleep. Letters written by returning Crusaders often mention the strangeness of dreaming after months of battle. Some said their minds refused to rest, that every sound of wind or wood snapping became a phantom alarm. Others confessed that sleep brought visions too vivid to ignore. A few even believed that dreams were messages sent from saints or lost comrades. You can imagine how those restless nights must have felt, where peace was both gift and punishment. You breathe slowly, and the air feels thick with the warmth of human life. Around you, men lie in rows, wrapped in furs and faith. Their faces twitch occasionally, their mouths half open in murmured fragments of prayer or memory. They are not entirely here anymore. They are walking again through deserts and hills far from this frozen keep. A curious description in a chronicle of the Teutonic Order tells how some Crusaders dreamed of the Holy Land with unbearable clarity. They could smell the sand and hear the bells of Jerusalem long after leaving it behind. When they woke, the disappointment was sharp enough to ache. One soldier wrote that the cold walls of Europe felt like exile, even after victory. Some historians wonder if these dreams were a kind of fever born from exhaustion and poor diet. Others see them as spiritual longing, the mind trying to reconcile faith with the brutal cold of home. Perhaps they were both. The line between miracle and memory is never clear in the dark. You turn your head and stare at the wooden ceiling. Smoke has stained it a deep brown, but when the firelight flickers, the beams seem to shimmer like a distant horizon. Your eyelids grow heavier. You imagine what you might dream if you surrendered completely. Perhaps you would find yourself marching again beneath foreign stars, the sound of drums echoing through your bones. Or perhaps you would find peace, lying beneath olive trees instead of towers. An old superstition whispered among Crusaders claimed that if you dreamed of light while sleeping in armor, it meant your soul was being tested by angels. If you dreamed of fire, it meant the opposite. You wonder which you would see tonight? The fire pops behind you, a single spark leaping into the air. Its glow paints the walls in trembling orange. Shadows move across the faces of the sleepers. They look almost like statues carved by some patient sculptor. The rise and fall of their chests gives rhythm to the silence. A forgotten traveller once wrote that to dream in a castle was to borrow its ghosts. You understand now what he meant. The stones seem to hum faintly, holding echoes of other sleepers from centuries before. Perhaps each person leaves behind a little fragment of their dreams, mingling in the air until they become part of the building itself. Experts disagree on whether Crusaders viewed dreams as sacred or suspect. Some clergy believed that dreams were divine revelations, while others warned that the devil spoke most clearly to those who slept too soundly. For the men in this hall, interpretation likely mattered less than survival. Dreams were escape, however brief, from a world that asked too much of them. You sink deeper into your own half-dream now. The sound of wind becomes the hush of waves. The flicker of fire becomes the shimmer of desert heat. You can smell salt and dust, and hear the faint creak of a saddle. For a moment, you are not in the castle at all. You are on the road again, sunlight sharp on your armor, the taste of sweat and hope in your mouth. Then, just as quickly, you are back, surrounded by snoring men and whispering flames. A peculiar detail survives in a soldier's diary, describing how, during the coldest nights, men would take turns telling dream tales before sleep. Each would share the strangest vision of the week, sometimes inventing stories to amuse the rest. It was a game, but also a ritual, a way of keeping imagination alive when reality grew too narrow. You can almost hear their laughter now, soft and weary, fading into the dark. The air has cooled again, though not enough to wake you. Your body has adjusted to the rhythm of the night, to the strange pulse of shared dreams. The sound of the fire steadies your breathing. You begin to understand how the Crusaders endured winters like this. They turned their minds inward, building warmth out of memory, prayer, and story. Outside, snow drifts silently against the walls. Inside, the sleepers twist and sigh, caught between worlds. Their dreams mingle with the smoke, invisible but alive. You close your eyes once more. Perhaps you too will dream of distant sunlight, of palm trees and seashells and the scent of warmer air. Perhaps you will wake before dawn and forget it all. Either way, the castle keeps your secrets. It has been listening to dreams for centuries, and it keeps them well. The fire has burned to ash again, but the faintest glow still lingers at its core. You wake slowly, uncertain if it is still night or the very first breath of dawn. The air feels heavier than before, thick with cold and the weight of many hours spent asleep. You pull your cloak closer and feel the rough seams under your fingers, stiff from frost and sweat. Around you the hall is a quiet sea of half-breaths and dreams fading away. Monastic records describe how faith often deepened during the hardest winters. When the cold pressed hardest against the walls, men turned more fiercely to prayer, believing that warmth of spirit could defy the frost of the flesh. The Crusaders were not monks, but they shared this idea. For them, the night was another battlefield, and faith was their only shield. You watch one man kneel before the dying fire. His armor is gone, his hands bare. He crosses himself slowly, tracing invisible lines of devotion through the smoke. His lips move without sound, his eyes open but distant. He might be praying for his family, for forgiveness, or for nothing more than dawn. A curious fragment from a letter found in a monastery archive tells of a knight who slept with a small relic tied around his wrist. It was said to be a scrap of cloth from a saint's robe. He believed that it warmed the blood when courage failed. Perhaps he was right. The act of believing can sometimes ignite its own fire. Some scholars remain uncertain whether these gestures of faith brought comfort or fear. For every man who found peace in prayer, another believed that divine silence was punishment. Cold and faith often tangled together, one feeding the other until they became indistinguishable. You can imagine the doubt that lingered in the dark, a shadow just behind the candlelight. You lie back again and look toward the rafters. The smoke has gathered there, curling in long ribbons before slipping out through the vents. It looks almost alive, like a spirit searching for escape. The castle feels different now, hushed but awake. Faith, it seems, hums beneath everything. The walls, the straw, even the air itself. A strange tradition mentioned in an old pilgrim's account described how men on the march would sleep with their rosaries wound around their hands, the beads pressed against their palms through the night, leaving tiny indentations on the skin by morning. Those marks were called the kisses of the saints. You imagine how comforting it must have been to wake and find proof that prayer had left its trace. The debate among theologians of the time centered on the question of whether faith was stronger in hardship or in comfort. Some insisted that suffering purified the soul. Others believed that true devotion required gratitude, not pain. Here, in the deep winter of this castle, you sense that no one had time to argue. Faith simply had to work. You rise quietly and walk toward the chapel door again. Its iron handle is cold under your hand. Inside, only one candle burns, its light too small to fill the space. The altar is covered with a thin layer of frost where the wax has spilled. You can see the faint outline of a chalice, glimmering faintly in the darkness. The scent of incense lingers, sweet and bitter at once. A peculiar account from the Rhineland describes knights leaving offerings of salt and bread at their bedside during harsh winters, gifts for guardian angels who kept the warmth from fleeing. Some even sprinkled wine across the floor in the shape of a cross before sleeping. Whether miracle or madness, the gesture gave shape to hope. You kneel beside the altar, though the stone is painfully cold. The candlelight flickers across your hands. It feels strange, praying in a time that no longer exists, but something in the air invites it. You whisper not for victory or strength, but for warmth that lasts until morning. The words do not echo. They settle gently into the silence, as if the stones have been waiting to hear them. No clear record tells us how many truly believed their prayers were answered. Historians find only fragments of devotion in margins of ledgers or scratched into walls. Yet you suspect that these quiet prayers mattered more than the grand ceremonies. They were small acts of survival, flickers of faith that refused to be extinguished. You stand again, rubbing your palms together. The air has grown colder, but it feels lighter somehow, as if the darkness itself has softened. Perhaps that is what faith did for them. It did not remove the cold, but made it bearable. You return to the hall. The first light of dawn has not yet arrived, but a pale shimmer traces the edges of the windows. The sleepers stir faintly. Someone coughs. Someone sighs. The fire gives one last sigh of its own, collapsing into embers. As you settle back onto your straw, you think of the knight with his relic, the rosaries, the whispered prayers. Their faith was not grand. It was stubborn. In that stubbornness you find something familiar, something that feels as warm as fire. You close your eyes and imagine a thin thread of light weaving through the cold, connecting every sleeper in the hall, every prayer spoken or forgotten. The castle seems to breathe with it, steady and calm. For the first time all night, you believe that morning will come. The first whisper of dawn has not yet touched the sky, yet the darkness feels thinner now. A quiet sigh passes through the hall as sleepers shift beneath their cloaks, caught between dream and waking. You remain still, your eyes half open, listening to the faint crackle of the last embers. The air carries a gentler chill, the kind that invites thought rather than fear. Castle letters and surviving journals show that winter nights could awaken unexpected tenderness among Crusaders. Away from the clash of swords and the glare of daylight, thoughts often drifted toward home. Many knights wrote letters by firelight, ink freezing on their quills, sealing parchment with wax before sleep. Some never sent them, others carried them into battle like charms. You picture one such man now. He sits at a rough table near the fire, his armor stacked beside him, his hands raw from cold. His quill trembles as he writes, and the ink dries unevenly on the page. He pauses often, staring into the glow as if the flames might whisper the right words. The letter is simple, a promise to return, a memory of laughter, perhaps a single line of poetry he once heard and never forgot. A curious tale preserved in a collection of troubadour songs speaks of a lady who stitched her husband's name into his blanket before he rode to war. She believed the thread carried her warmth across the sea. The fabric, found years later in a ruined stronghold, still bore faint letters. You imagine the comfort it must have brought him, that small touch of love in a world of iron and frost. Some modern historians interpret these letters and tokens as practical comforts, symbols of identity in a time when death was constant. Others argue that they were a form of quiet rebellion, proof that the heart could survive even in the service of war. You think both must be true. Love, like warmth, is a kind of defiance. You notice movement in the shadows. A soldier stirs, then sits upright. He pulls something from his satchel, a small object wrapped in linen. The firelight glints briefly on metal, a locket perhaps, or a ring. He holds it for a moment, pressing it to his lips, then hides it again beneath his cloak. His face softens before he lies back down. You feel as if you have witnessed a prayer that needed no words. One unusual account from the letters of a Crusader widow tells how women back home kept their husbands' worn gloves beside their beds during winter. They believed the smell of leather carried a trace of the man himself. It was not perfume, but proof of life. You breathe in the air around you and think of how scent, touch, and memory entwine until they become indistinguishable. The fire flickers again, and you catch sight of a folded scrap of parchment lying near the hearth. It must have fallen from someone's pack. The writing is blurred, but you can make out the start of a sentence. If you read this, know that I still feel the warmth of your hand. The ink has bled into the fibers, as if the paper itself tried to keep the words alive. Researchers have long debated whether these private letters were ever meant to reach their destinations. Many Crusaders carried them as talismans, not messages. Some were buried with them, tucked against their hearts. In that sense, the act of writing was its own form of prayer, a way to keep love from freezing. You glance around the hall and notice more traces of affection hidden in plain sight. A token of coloured ribbon tied to a scabbard, a piece of embroidery used as a handkerchief. Small rebellions against the sameness of iron and stone. In this light, Even a scrap of colour seems like a shout of life. A strange belief, recorded by a minstrel, claimed that words of love written by firelight could not be destroyed by flame. Lovers would test this by holding their letters close to the coals until the paper browned but did not burn. You picture the courage it took to risk a message turning to ash, and the relief when it survived intact. Perhaps they saw that as a blessing, a sign that affection could endure anything. No historian can truly capture the ache that lived in these rooms. The records are too sparse, the language too formal. But you can feel it now, in the air itself, in the faint sighs of men dreaming of faces they may never see again. For all the armour and discipline, the castle at night was full of longing. You lie back and close your eyes. The smell of smoke and parchment lingers. Somewhere, a man murmurs a name before slipping into sleep again. The walls, carved by centuries of such whispers, seem to listen. Outside, the horizon begins to pale. Inside, hearts and embers glow faintly, holding on to warmth that words once promised. You breathe deeply, and for a moment, you feel it too, the tenderness that survives, even the coldest night, quiet and undefeated. The castle exhales, and somewhere below, you hear a low hum that might be voices. The faint aroma of roasted grain drifts up from the kitchen passage, mixing with the smoke of the dying fire. Hunger wakes before dawn, as it always has. You rise slowly, stretching stiffness from your shoulders, and follow the warm breath of the air toward the source. It is recorded in household ledgers that the kitchen never truly slept during the coldest months. Fires were kept alive to prevent frost from cracking pots and to make sure that the lord could have hot broth at any hour. These were the warmest rooms in any fortress, and in winter they became a secret refuge. You walk through the corridor, guided by the faint orange glow ahead. The air grows thicker, warmer, alive with the scent of yeast and smoke. Your boots scrape against stone darkened by centuries of soot. The moment you step into the kitchen, the world changes. Here the chill ends, replaced by the pulse of fire and labour. The hearth is immense, built wide enough to roast an ox. The coals shimmer with colour, and heat presses against your face like a hand. A pot of porridge simmers slowly, steam curling upward in graceful ribbons. You hear the soft clatter of ladles and the occasional sleepy curse from a cook turning bread near the flames. A curious note in a merchant's diary from the late 12th century describes how kitchen workers used to sleep beside the oven, wrapping themselves in flour sacks when the fire burned low. It was the only place in the castle where warmth could be counted on. You can picture them now, curled like cats, their faces flushed from heat, while the rest of the world froze above them. Some scholars question whether this practice was tolerated by the lord's household or quietly ignored. Official records rarely mention servants sleeping in kitchens, yet ash mixed with straw has been found in corners of excavated keeps. The evidence speaks softly but clearly. People survived where they could. You move closer to the main hearth. The cooks are half awake, eyes heavy, their movements steady through habit. One stirs the pot with a wooden spoon as tall as his shoulder. Another rolls dough on the table, her breath fogging the air despite the warmth. They work in rhythm, a quiet dance guided by need. A peculiar anecdote from an old kitchen ledger tells that cooks sometimes poured a little ale into the porridge on bitter mornings, claiming it made the spirit braver. The habit likely began as indulgence but soon became tradition. You watch one of them do exactly that now, tipping a cup into the pot and stirring as if blending courage itself. Historians are divided on whether the kitchen was considered sacred or profane. Some argue it was a place of elemental magic, where food transformed and warmth was born. Others see it as a space of servitude, hidden from the noble eye. Yet here, in the glow of the coals, both ideas seem true. The kitchen is both heart and shadow, the place where survival takes shape. A small black cat slinks across the floor, tail raised, eyes bright. It pauses to sniff at a basket of scraps, then curls near the fire, purring softly. The cooks pay it no attention, It is part of the routine. Many castles kept cats for pest control, but some believed they carried luck as well. One chronicle claims that feeding a kitchen cat ensured heat in the hearth and peace in the household. You cannot help smiling. The smell of baking bread thickens in the air, sweet and comforting. It fills every corner, wrapping around you like a blanket. You imagine how many soldiers, servants, and lords began their days with this scent. In a world ruled by hunger and cold, it was as close to heaven as one could come. No full agreement exists among archaeologists about what exact foods sustained winter life in these castles. Grains, salted meats, and root vegetables dominate the records, but small luxuries like honey and dried fruit appear too. A meal could be both humble and miraculous when shared by firelight. One cook ladles porridge into wooden bowls and sets them on the table. Steam rises, carrying the scent of nutmeg. She hums softly, a tune with no words, her voice blending with the sound of boiling water. You take a seat nearby, feeling the warmth soak into your hands. The first spoonful tastes earthy and rich, the kind of food that feeds both stomach and patience. The cat stretches beside you, its fur hot to the touch. Someone laughs quietly, breaking the long silence of the night. You realize how human this moment feels, stripped of ceremony and armor. Just warmth, food, and shared fatigue. A chronicler once wrote that the kitchen was where peace lived while war slept. Sitting here, you understand what he meant. The world beyond the walls can wait. Inside, for now, there is heat, the smell of bread, and the slow heartbeat of the fire. You finish eating and rest your hands on the table. The wood is warm, polished by generations. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of smoke and grain linger. Outside, the wind still prowls, but in here, it feels very far away. You could stay like this forever, listening to the hiss of the pot and the soft purr of the cat. In a castle built for battle, this small room is its truest refuge. You close your eyes and let the warmth sink deeper, until it feels like part of you. When you return from the kitchen, the hall feels quieter, emptier, but the air is a little warmer now. The first hour of dawn approaches, and with it, a restlessness that creeps through the sleepers. A cough echoes, a boot scrapes against the floor, a soft snore breaks the rhythm of silence. Somewhere behind the walls, a draught slides like a cold finger through the stones. The comfort from the kitchen fades quickly, replaced by the sting of returning frost. It is recorded in medieval herbals that sickness often arrived with the cold. The dampness of stone, the smoke of fires, and the closeness of bodies created the perfect environment for fever. In such conditions, healers became as essential as blacksmiths. The Crusaders carried with them not only swords but bundles of herbs, jars of salve, and prayers whispered in languages older than Latin. You watch as a servant moves through the hall with a small tray of cups. The smell of rosemary and vinegar drifts after her, sharp and clean. She pauses beside a soldier who sits upright, his face pale in the dim light. He sips the mixture without protest, his expression weary but trusting. She places a hand briefly on his shoulder before moving on. An unusual entry in a healer's notebook from the early 13th century lists warmth and courage as the first ingredients for any winter cure. Beneath it, in smaller script, the same writer adds, "and prayer, if the patient will have it." You imagine that even then, science and faith work together in strange harmony, neither complete without the other. Researchers are divided over how effective these treatments were. Some argue that herbal knowledge was surprisingly sophisticated, that local plants like thyme, mint, and sage were valuable antiseptics. Others claim that most of it was superstition, guided by luck and ritual rather than reason. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. Survival in winter was an experiment repeated every year, with varying success. You notice a small figure at the far end of the hall, the castle's apothecary perhaps, or a monk trained in medicine, sorting bundles of dried herbs beside the fire. The smell of camphor fills the air, followed by the sweetness of honey melting into a pot of wine. He stirs the mixture slowly, muttering as he works. His hands are steady, his face illuminated by the orange light. A curious superstition mentioned in a letter from a pilgrim doctor describes how a sprig of basil was sometimes pinned to a patient's sleeve to spark the blood. Whether the idea came from the East or grew out of local folklore, no one knows. You imagine the bright green leaves against rough wool, a small defiance against the grey of winter. Archaeologists have found tiny glass bottles in the ruins of several Crusader castles, still faintly scented with myrrh and lavender. Some believe they held ointments for aching joints or frostbite. Others think they were perfumes meant to mask the less holy odours of a crowded garrison. Either way, they tell a story of people trying to make comfort tangible, to bottle warmth itself. The apothecary pours his potion into small clay cups and lines them up neatly. The surface shimmers with oil. He ladles one portion into a wooden bowl and carries it toward a knight resting near the wall. The man coughs weakly but manages a faint smile. The healer says something too quiet to hear, then presses the bowl into his hands. The exchange feels sacred in its simplicity. Some experts continue to debate the role of women in healing during the Crusades. While church records credit monks and physicians, local chronicles speak of wives, midwives, and herbalists tending the sick with knowledge passed through generations. They were rarely mentioned by name, but their craft survives in the language of remedies. Mother's balm, sister's oil, widow's tea. Their hands left no signatures, only results. The smell of the potion grows stronger, filling the hall with a strange mix of spice and bitterness. It reminds you of warmth hidden inside pain, like sunlight caught in ice. The sick soldier sips slowly, then lies back again. His breathing steadies. Perhaps the cure has done nothing, or perhaps it has done enough. A small bowl of crushed mint sits beside the apothecary's tools. He sprinkles a pinch into the air, letting the scent rise. Some say mint clears the mind and keeps the devil from whispering in dreams. The air feels lighter afterward, as if the hall itself has exhaled. You realize that every act of healing in this world was also an act of hope. Whether by faith or herb, by touch or prayer, it was always a rebellion against despair. The warmth of the potion, the smell of mint, the quiet labor of hands, all of it said the same thing: we are still alive. The apothecary extinguishes his lamp and gathers his herbs. Around him, the sleepers breathe more deeply. The wind outside softens. You sit back down, listening to the faint bubbling of the pot as it cools. Somewhere, a single drop falls into the fire and sizzles away. The cold remains, but it feels different now. It is no longer an enemy, just another presence in the room. You close your eyes, comforted by the thought that even in a world ruled by steel and stone, someone always found a way to brew warmth. The first dull light of morning touches the highest beams of the hall. It filters through narrow slits in the stone, pale and thin, painting faint stripes across the sleeping faces. The castle is stirring but still half caught in the drowsy rhythm of night. You lie still and listen. The hall breathes like a single creature. Contemporary accounts describe how the first sound most castle dwellers heard at dawn was not the bell or the horn, but snoring. It was a chorus of humanity, an orchestra of exhaustion. Some found it comical, others strangely comforting, the audible proof that warmth and life persisted. The sound was so constant that chroniclers rarely mentioned it. To them, it was as ordinary as firelight. You hear it now. Deep, rolling snores from the men nearest the hearth blend with the softer sighs of those further away. A few dream aloud, their words unintelligible. Somewhere near the door, a soldier mumbles in French, while across the room another answers in Latin without waking. It is the strange conversation of sleep, where languages blur and time forgets itself. A curious entry in the journal of a travelling minstrel recounts how he once judged a lord's hospitality by the harmony of his household's snoring. If the walls trembled, he wrote, it was proof that all within were warm. You smile, hearing the soft rumble around you, and realize that comfort can sometimes be measured by noise. Some historians suggest that medieval people slept in cycles, rising once in the middle of the night before returning to rest. The custom was called the first and second sleep. During that waking interval, people prayed, talked quietly, or even visited neighbors within the safety of the castle. You can imagine it here: sleepy faces around the hearth, soft laughter, whispered gossip before slipping back under blankets. You sit up slightly, careful not to wake the man beside you. His helmet rests beside his head like a loyal dog. His mouth hangs open, his snore deep and regular. The sound makes you smile despite yourself. There is a peculiar peace in this raw humanity, a reminder that even the fiercest warrior is still a creature of breath and warmth. An amusing detail survives in a servant's account describing how noblemen would sometimes compete over whose snoring was loudest. The winner apparently was teased as having lungs fit for a horn. You picture it now, laughter rolling through the hall before the joke fades back into slumber. Researchers remain divided on whether communal sleep affected health. Some believe the shared warmth reduced illness, while others argue that disease spread more easily in such close quarters. The truth is probably both. In this place, comfort and contagion coexist, just as laughter and fatigue share the same air. The smell of smoke lingers, mixed with the sour-sweet scent of bodies. The air feels thick but not unpleasant. It is the smell of living, of time condensed into breath. You lean back against the wall and close your eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of snoring wash over you like waves. A curious superstition noted in a minor friar's diary says that if a man snored loudly, angels mistook it for prayer and blessed his sleep. The friar added wryly that, by this measure, many soldiers were saints. You cannot help laughing quietly at the thought, careful not to wake anyone. The fire has burned low again. Only a few orange veins of coal remain, pulsing faintly in the grey ash. Yet the air near it still glows with heat. You shift closer and feel its slow, patient warmth against your legs. The sound of snoring grows fainter as more men stir awake. They groan softly, stretch, and pull their cloaks tighter. The hall fills with the rustle of straw and the sigh of wool. Some experts note that mornings in castles were slow to begin in winter. There was little reason to rise early when the sun offered no warmth. Duties waited for daylight, and daylight waited for courage. For now, the men linger in that delicious space between rest and resolve. You hear a faint creak above, perhaps a pigeon settling on the roof, or snow sliding from the tiles. The noise makes one sleeper turn and mutter. He coughs once, then continues snoring. It is absurdly human, this mix of noise and stillness, strength and helplessness. A small smile touches your lips. You realize that the sounds of sleep are more than background. They are the heartbeat of this world. They carry history as surely as the clang of weapons or the chanting of prayers. Every breath is an echo of survival, each snore a note in the long song of endurance. No one writes about these moments in chronicles. Yet here, in the dim hush between night and morning, you find the truest measure of peace. Not triumph, not glory, but the soft music of bodies at rest. You close your eyes again and listen. The castle sighs, the wind hums faintly through the cracks, and the sleepers snore on, unashamed and unbroken. For now, that is enough. The wind begins to rise again, low at first, then swelling until the walls seem to hum. You feel it as a vibration through the floor, a reminder that even stone is not immune to the breath of the world outside. The fire flickers nervously, and a few men groan in their sleep, pulling blankets tighter around their shoulders. The storm has returned. Chroniclers of the northern Crusader states often described winter tempests as living creatures. They wrote of gales that prowled the battlements like wolves, howling and clawing for entry. The walls could withstand siege engines and armies, but against cold air they were helpless. You hear it now, the long moan that seems to circle the keep, searching for a way inside. You rise and walk toward one of the narrow windows. A faint beam of light cuts through the grey. Snow whirls like smoke, filling the courtyard with ghostly motion. Each gust presses against the shutters, testing their strength. For a moment, you imagine the wind as an enemy army, unseen but relentless, hurling itself again and again at the walls. A curious letter from a castle steward in Burgundy describes how during great storms, everyone would fall silent, listening to the noise of the wind. It was not fear, he wrote, but respect. They believed the storm carried the voices of angels fighting demons above the clouds. You can almost hear that battle now in the rhythm of gusts and pauses, the high cry followed by deep stillness. Some historians debate whether these castles were truly as indestructible as they appeared. The walls, though thick, were vulnerable to moisture that froze and expanded, splitting stone along invisible seams. To live here was to dwell inside a fortress that slowly, silently decayed each winter. The sound of a storm might not just be weather, but the whisper of a future ruin. The hall grows darker as clouds blot out the pale dawn. A servant hurries to reinforce the door with an iron bar. His face is drawn but calm. Storms are familiar companions. He checks the hinges, adjusts a blanket stuffed into the gap beneath the door, then returns to the hearth. The fire flares as he stirs it, sending sparks into the air. A peculiar superstition from a 12th century household guide advised throwing a pinch of flour into the flames during storms to appease the spirit of the wind. Perhaps it was a symbolic offering, a gesture to remind nature that humans still lived inside its bones. You think of the kitchens below, the grain stored carefully against hunger, and how generous such an offering must have felt. The sound of the storm deepens. Snow pelts the walls in soft, rhythmic thuds. Somewhere above, a shutter slams open, then shut again. A muffled curse follows, then silence. You feel the cold pressing harder, as if the air itself wants to remind you of its power. The draught finds every weakness, slipping across your neck, creeping into your boots. Some scholars claim that storms created a strange intimacy within the walls. Cut off from the world, people turned inward. The noise outside became the rhythm of thought, the pulse that reminded them of how fragile safety was. You can feel that closeness now. Every sound inside the hall seems magnified. The hiss of fire, the shifting of straw, the quiet breath of men who pretend to sleep but are listening too. You glance toward the upper gallery, where a candle flickers near the small chapel door. The flame bends each time the wind hits, struggling to stay upright. Watching it, you think of faith again, how it resembles that little light, steady yet trembling. Perhaps that is what the Crusaders meant when they said that storms test both stone and soul. A curious fragment from a forgotten song tells that castles once had singing walls. When wind swept through the arrow slits at just the right angle, the air vibrated in tones that echoed through the corridors. Some believed these sounds were omens. Others said they were simply the castle's voice. Tonight it feels true. The whole building seems to sing a long, low note of endurance. No agreement exists among engineers and historians about how medieval builders adapted to such punishment. Some evidence points to hidden drainage channels carved into the walls, others to clever designs of layered mortar that flexed instead of cracking. Perhaps they simply accepted that every winter demanded repair, as life always does. The storm reaches its height. The walls groan softly, beams shudder, and a flurry of snow bursts through a crack near the window. You brush it away, but the flakes melt against your skin, leaving trails of cold water that sting like memory. The air smells suddenly clean, as if the storm itself has washed away the smoke and sweat of the night. You close your eyes and listen to the rhythm of wind against stone. It is wild, yet strangely beautiful. There is power in the sound, a reminder that no fortress, no faith, no fire can exist without something to oppose it. The storm makes the warmth inside meaningful. Gradually the gusts weaken. The moan fades to a sigh. The castle relaxes, as if releasing a breath it had held too long. Someone near the hearth begins to snore again, unbothered by what has passed. The fire crackles louder now, reclaiming the silence. You return to your place among the sleepers. the straw cool against your hands. Outside, the snow still falls, softer now, like ashes settling after battle. You feel the calm that follows survival, the quiet victory of simply remaining warm. The storm has tested every wall, but you are still here. The storm fades into memory, leaving a deep stillness behind. For the first time in hours, the castle feels truly quiet. The air smells of damp ash and stone, a blend of exhaustion and relief. You lie awake and sense the moment when night begins to surrender to dawn. Somewhere outside, a rooster cries once, its voice thin but certain. The cold for now has been endured. Documents from the period describe the fragile peace of early morning in medieval fortresses. The final watchmen descended from the towers, their faces grey with fatigue and frost. The priests stirred in the chapels, readying the first prayers. The cooks relit the kitchen fires. Life reassembled itself piece by piece, as if rebuilding from the ruins of darkness. You sit up slowly, brushing straw from your cloak. Around you, others are waking, a few stretch stiff limbs groaning softly. One man kneels to gather the ashes from the hearth, coaxing a flame back to life with gentle persistence. The fire catches, small and steady. Its glow begins to paint the walls gold. An old saying recorded by a chronicler of the Teutonic Order claims that a castle's courage begins with its first spark. The notion feels true. Every morning began with this simple ritual, the rekindling of fire, a quiet defiance against the night. You watch it grow brighter, the warmth crawling slowly across the flagstones toward you. A curious fragment from a merchant's letter tells how dawn smelled differently after a storm. The snow, he wrote, gave off a scent like iron and apples. You take a breath and catch a hint of it even here, mingled with smoke. The air tastes new, sharp and promising, as if the world has been washed clean. Scholars often discuss the symbolic power of dawn in Crusader culture. It marked both renewal and discipline, the moment when faith demanded action again. Yet inside these cold walls, dawn must have felt simply like survival. The light returning meant another day lived. You feel that understanding settle into you, simple and real. The horn sounds outside, deep and brief. Its echo fills the courtyard, bouncing through corridors and chambers. Men rise at once, rubbing their eyes, gathering cloaks and belts. The castle wakes in a slow wave of motion. Footsteps shuffle, armor clinks, the rhythm of duty returns. One peculiar anecdote from an old guard's record describes how, during the coldest winters, the morning horn was sometimes blown twice. The first call summoned those who wished to pray. The second, those who wished to eat. Few could resist the second. You smile at the honesty of it. A line of servants carries buckets of water through the hall, their steps quick and quiet. The buckets steam in the frigid air. The first chores of the day begin long before sunlight reaches the ground. You hear the scrape of brooms, the soft clink of dishes being gathered, the faint murmur of orders exchanged in half whispers. Some historians argue that this rhythm of rising and labor formed the psychological core of castle life. After long nights of uncertainty, structure returned like medicine. The cold had its own hierarchy, and duty was the warmth that kept despair from spreading. You see it now in the disciplined calm of these morning movements. The priest emerges from the chapel, his robe heavy with frost at the hem. He carries a small book and a wooden cross. Without a word, he moves through the hall, touching the cross lightly to the foreheads of those nearby. They bow their heads, some out of devotion, others simply from habit. His presence feels both solemn and tender, a final echo of the knight's faith before work begins. A curious custom mentioned in a Breton manuscript notes that after especially cold nights, a few drops of wine were added to the morning blessing water. The priest believed it warmed the soul as it sanctified. You wonder if that tradition ever reached this place, or if it lived only in words. The light strengthens, pale and clear. It slips through the cracks in the shutters, painting long, soft lines across the sleeping hall. Dust dances in the air, golden in the glow. The castle looks gentler now. The hardness of stone seems to soften under the promise of another day. No chronicler ever captured these small dawns, these fragile victories against the cold. Yet you realize they were the heart of every winter. Battles might fill the pages, but mornings like this filled the lives. You stand and stretch, feeling warmth return to your fingers. The fire burns stronger now. Outside, the horn sounds again, calling the day forward. The night, for all its trials, has passed. You look around the hall one last time. The faces that slept in fear and fatigue are now awake, alive, and ready. The world beyond the castle waits, but for this moment everything feels balanced. The cold, the warmth, the faith, and the fatigue coexist in perfect stillness. You take a breath, letting the air of morning fill you. The sound of footsteps, of life, replaces the storm. And in that simple music of dawn, you understand what the Crusaders must have felt each morning after surviving the night. Not triumph, not relief, but quiet gratitude. The horn fades into silence, leaving behind the steady hum of movement. Morning has come at last. The castle glows faintly in the new light, its edges softened by snow and ash. You breathe in and feel the air change, no longer cutting but crisp and alive. The cold remains, but it has lost its cruelty. It is simply part of the rhythm now, a quiet reminder of what has been endured. Records from the period note that mornings after great storms carried a kind of solemn calm. People spoke in softer voices, moved more carefully, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. The Crusaders were no different. Having survived another frozen night, they began their rituals of gratitude and renewal. A cup of ale, a whispered prayer, a moment to stretch before facing the new day. You watch as men gather near the hearth to feed the flames one final time. The fire crackles brightly, painting their faces gold. They stand close, shoulders brushing, sharing warmth without words. A few laugh softly at something half remembered from the night before. The laughter is brief but genuine, the sound of life pushing through frost. A curious account from a Benedictine scribe tells of how ashes from the hearth were sometimes mixed with oil and used to polish armor before sunrise. The idea was both practical and symbolic. The remnants of the night turned into protection for the day ahead. You picture it now. Grey powder brushed gently across steel, until it shines, the fire's memory carried into battle. Some scholars suggest that this transformation of ashes into purpose reflected a deeper belief, that nothing in life, not even hardship, should be wasted. The Crusaders lived by that philosophy without naming it. The cold, the fear, the prayers, the sleeplessness, all became part of their endurance. Survival was both punishment and blessing. You walk toward the nearest window. The shutters are open now, letting in pale gold light. Outside, the courtyard glitters with frost. The snow has settled into soft drifts, sculpted by the wind into patterns that shimmer like silk. You can see footprints crossing from the stables to the chapel, the only marks of motion in a world remade by silence. A peculiar detail in a household record mentions that after such nights, the servants would hang damp cloaks by the walls, allowing the rising sun to dry them slowly. The smell of thawing wool and smoke filled the halls, mingling with the aroma of baking bread. It was the scent of recovery. You inhale deeply and catch traces of it now, faint but real. No scholar truly agrees on how the Crusaders measured time inside these walls. Some believe they counted by prayers, others by chores. Yet standing here, you sense that time in a castle was less about hours and more about endurance. Each morning was proof that night could be conquered again and again. A group of soldiers gathers near the open door. They squint against the brightness, then step outside. Their boots crunch in the snow, leaving fresh prints over the old. The sound is steady, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. You follow them with your eyes as they move toward the yard, their breath clouding behind them. One odd superstition recorded by a traveller from Genoa claimed that if you could see your breath in the first light of morning, it meant your soul was still strong. You exhale slowly and watch the mist rise and vanish, feeling oddly reassured. The priest appears again, his robe trailing across the floor. He sprinkles water on the fire, hissing softly as the last coals fade to steam. The hall smells briefly of damp ashes. Around you, men begin to gather their belongings, fastening belts, checking swords, adjusting cloaks. Each gesture feels deliberate, practiced by habit and necessity. The fire is gone now, but the warmth it created lingers in the air. You look around and notice how light has changed the room. What was harsh and grey by night now glows with soft colour. Banners once dull now shimmer faintly. Even the walls, streaked with soot, seem gentler. The castle looks less like a fortress and more like a shelter. You realize that the true miracle of these nights was not survival alone, but persistence. Every storm, every prayer, every ember added to the quiet testimony of endurance. The Crusaders, for all their battles and burdens, were simply trying to stay warm, to hold fast against the cold world that surrounded them. You take one last look at the hall before you go. The smell of ashes and bread lingers, mingling with the faint scent of melting snow. The air is alive again. The cold will return, as it always does. But so will the fire, the faith, the laughter. Warmth, you realize, is not a thing kept. It is a thing remade each day. You close your eyes and listen to the sounds of morning. Boots on stone, birds waking in the towers, the creak of wood as the castle stretches under sunlight. The night is behind you now, its stories folded into the air. You feel its weight and its peace both. The Crusaders have survived another winter night. So have you. Now that the story has quieted, take a deep breath. The fire is gone, but its warmth still hums in the walls. You can almost feel the slow heartbeat of the castle beneath your hand, steady and eternal. Outside, the snow has stopped. The air glows with that strange brightness that comes only after storms, soft and forgiving. Let your mind rest there for a moment. Picture the empty hall, the scattered straw, the faint curl of smoke still rising where the hearth once burned. The echoes of footsteps fade, replaced by the sigh of the wind through high windows. What was fierce only hours ago now feels tender. Even the cold has gentled into stillness. You imagine walking through the courtyard. Your breath clouds and disappears into light. The snow crunches under your boots. Each step leaves a mark that the sun will soon erase. Above you, the sky opens wide and blue. The world feels clean, as if all the noise of history has been washed away. The Crusaders have gone to their tasks, and the castle keeps its quiet watch. You stand for a moment longer, listening to nothing but your own breathing. There is no battle left, no prayer waiting to be said, no story demanding to be remembered. Only this calm, this perfect pause between one heartbeat and the next. So let it fade slowly. Let the last warmth sink into your chest and drift outward. The walls are silent again, the air soft. Sleep waits just beyond the door. Good night, traveller. May your dreams be gentle and your nights warm.